So it's looking at these kinds of original historical sources that really provide the kind of evidence that we want students to engage with. And what they have to do is synthesize these. That is, the good historical questions are not one where you can just look up an answer. What date did something happen? But rather are ones where you have to look at more than one source in order to draw some conclusions about it. And that's really at the heart of what investigation is. So for example, if students are investigating how life in Indiana has changed over the last century, then they're going to be looking at things like photographs from different time periods and looking at what things are the same, what things are different, what changes they can see there. There's no encyclopedia entry or Wikipedia entry that you can look up at and just copy down the answer, how has life in Indiana changed over the last century? It's going to be a matter of investigation, of drawing conclusions from different kinds of evidence. Or if students are investigating, what were homes like 100 years ago? Well, there are a lot of different sources they can look at, but they might, for example, look at advertisements from newspapers from the last century and see what they can tell from these advertisements, both about what homes look like and also what people valued. One of the things that's interesting about advertisements is they're usually making a pitch to try to meet people's needs or what people see as their needs. Just like one example here, you see health is something to be thankful for, safeguarded always. Tells you something about the need to keep food from spoiling 100 years ago and how important that was. So again, by looking at different sources like these, students can draw conclusions from evidence. This is actually something that students need a lot of practice with because it's not actually something that they pick up outside school. Outside school, and oftentimes inside school, the way they know about the past is somebody told them. And so when you ask students, how do we know what happened a long time ago? Or how do we know what life was like a long time ago? They will almost always say, well, it's been passed down. For example, they'll say, well, like if adults lived then, and if your grandparents or something were alive at a certain time, they could tell you. Now, of course, that's true, but what's interesting is that unless students have studied historical investigation in school, they think all historical knowledge is like this. So for example, I've asked students, what about people who write books about history? How do they know what happened a long time ago? Well, authors had like ancestors that were there back then, and they just passed it on. So students think that if somebody writes a book about the American Revolution, they know about it because the information's been passed down through their families. I asked one group of students, well, they'd just been studying Native American life. And I said, but okay, you're looking at Native Americans who lived, you're looking at the period before settlers even got here, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. How do we know what their lives were like? One kid said, well, maybe an Indian that lives now has it passed on to him from his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers who lived back then, lived to be 90 years old and passed down to him, so now he could tell us about that. Because students outside school usually learn about the past by somebody telling them, and like I say, oftentimes in school, they don't actually realize that we piece together evidence of the past in order to reach conclusions about it, and that it's not just passed down by word of mouth. So the key point here I want to make is that history is a process of investigation that involves reaching conclusions from evidence. This is the main thing we need to focus on in schools, is helping students understand how evidence can lead to conclusions about the past that helps you answer questions. But why is this important? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is that this is really what it means to be an educated person. I mean, when you think beyond just specific subject areas, we think that one of the main characteristics of someone who is educated is that they're able to reach conclusions, that they can make up their own minds about things, and that they can base that on evidence. Whether it's science or social studies or other areas, that's really at the core of what it means to become educated. And you can think about K through 12 or K-16 education as really being a matter of reaching conclusions from evidence. Even in our own lives as teachers, why do we teach the way we do? Well, we see what works and what doesn't, and so we reach some conclusions about that. So that's one very basic reason, is just what it means to be an educated person. But it's also particularly important, I think, in this day and age, where there's so much misinformation, so much fake news, and clearly there are a lot of people who just believe things that sometimes are crazy. Conspiracy theories, climate change is not happening, or people didn't land on the moon, or the Holocaust never happened. If people in the public sphere are just responding to conspiracy theories that they've read on Facebook or something like that, then they're really not able to reach evidence-based conclusions. So when we're preparing students to do this with regard to history, when we're having them look at old advertisements to say, what was life like 100 years ago? That's really very much preparation for being able to critically examine the claims they're going to encounter in lots of different areas. And it seems like to me that really reaching conclusions based on evidence is the central skill of democratic civic participation. When people come into the public sphere to talk to other people, to try to persuade other people, to try to reach decisions together with other people, we expect them to have good reasons for the things they say. We don't expect them to make claims based on some random internet conspiracy theory or to base it just on the voice of authority. We expect people to enter democratic life with a belief in logic and a belief in evidence. And it's this skill that I think we really have to keep in mind throughout social studies, throughout schooling. So all that's about why it's important, but the question still, well, can young children do all that? Can young children really investigate historical questions and draw conclusions from evidence? And the answer is absolutely yes. All my years of sitting in classrooms, watching teachers, talking to kids, there is no question that even the youngest children can do this. For example, something I've done with many kids in multiple countries, in fact, is give them photographs from different time periods and ask them, which one of these do you think is older? And which one do you think is closer to now? And almost without exception, students can not only put them in the right order, but give really good reasons for why they did it. They can talk about clothes, fashion, technology, architecture, social roles even, and explain why they know that one of these is older than the other. You give them more pictures like this and say, what about this one? Same time as one of the others, older, newer, in between. And again, they can place it and they can explain why it goes there, looking at clues in the photos. They can keep doing it, giving them more pictures from different times. And they're really good at putting them in order and, more importantly, explaining why. Looking at the evidence in the photos to draw conclusions about time. In Northern Ireland, it's interesting that and this is a place where I've spent years in classrooms. There, young children work with evidence every day. So in Northern Ireland elementary school classrooms, first of all, they study history almost every day. But they're doing things like looking at old photographs to see what they can conclude about school at the time, or they're looking at reconstruction of Viking villages or rationing cards from World War II. and drawing conclusions from these. The picture in the upper right-hand corner here is an interesting one because the first time I was in Northern Ireland, my daughter was 8 years old, and she was in school there, equivalent of 3rd grade. And I remember so clearly one day in November, in their textbook, they were looking at this picture, which is an archaeological site where they're looking at the pattern of remains in a Mesolithic village or a Mesolithic settlement and seeing what they can conclude about life at the time. Now, if she were back in the United States in November of 3rd grade, she'd probably be making paper mache turkey puppets for Thanksgiving. So the assumption there is that students can do these sophisticated things, and sure enough, they can. So for example, in Northern Ireland, because they're so used to looking at evidence, there, when I ask students, how do we know what happened a long time ago? They'll say things like, well, they keep going and looking for clues. Or people find remains and they started to study and they started to find out what kind of life they had, the way they made their things. Or they find things, fossils and photographs and old clothes and things people wore. Or, well, there's archaeologists, and they'll dig up and find like scrolls and bits of jugs and all, or maybe even ruins of the wall or house or whatever. So when students have experience working with evidence and drawing conclusions from it, they come to understand it. Well, that's how you know things. Versus US kids who, until they get experience with this, really don't understand how we know things. Now, I've also watched somewhat older kids in the United States, like 5th graders, work with very sophisticated written resources. So this is a collection of documents, what happened on Lexington Green. This is about the Battle of Lexington Green, just before the American Revolution. And it turns out that there's like 30 or more different accounts of what happened. People who were there, people who were on both sides, people talking about it soon afterwards, people talking about it years later. And these accounts are not really all the same. They say very different things about how many people were there, who fired first, where they were, and so on. I've watched 5th graders with teacher guidance work through these old documents to reach their own conclusions about what does the evidence best support. How can we make claims about what's most likely to have happened? So again, elementary kids absolutely can do these sorts of things. Of course, part of that comes down to the question of interest as well, because they're not going to do any of this if they're not interested. And students are interested in history. They're not necessarily interested in who the first governor of Indiana was or early explorers and so on. They're interested in things related to material history, what homes look like, what fashion looked like, and so on, family life, social history, people they can relate to, as well as dramatic incidents that involved real people. Not so much the traditional political and military history, like how Indiana's Constitution was developed, that kind of thing. Not a whole lot of interest there. But when it comes to real people leading real lives, whether everyday life or more dramatic events, students can be very interested in that. So just to sum up here, really want to emphasize, what's history all about? Well, it's an investigation. It means drawing conclusions from evidence, not just remembering what somebody told you. And yes, they absolutely can do it. They're interested in doing it. They're capable of doing it, even from a young age. Obviously, with teacher guidance, you have to help them do these things, but they absolutely can do it. And nothing's more important. I simply cannot think of a single skill that's more important than helping students draw conclusions from evidence. Even if we think about such important things as math and literacy, why do you need to know math? Why do you need to be literate? Well, it's partly so that you can draw conclusions from the things that you read, from the things that you work with in the real world. So history as investigation is my theme here, and I hope that that has set up some of the things that you'll be doing more practically as the day goes on today. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. That was awesome. there's a couple questions or a couple minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to log them on the chat box there. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I get to see Keith kind of often in conferences and whatnot, but he really is a top expert in the field of elementary social studies. If you Google him, if you haven't heard of him already, you'll see that he really has done a lot of the research and a lot of the work for the field of elementary social studies so that we know what critical investigation looks like and what young people can do.
However, if you do Google me, there's a very shady lawyer in Utah, also named Keith Barton. So don't get me mixed up with him.
Sure, Keith, that wasn't you. We'll believe that. All right. I'll pause just in case there's any questions. That was really wonderful, Keith. What textbook series do you suggest when teaching social studies in K through 6?
So, I don't have that much experience with the current textbook series. However, I'm going to say that one of the best is, make sure I get the publisher right, hold on.
And as Keith does that, I'll mention that I was on the Monroe County. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah.
Textbook selection committee after a really, some of you know this story, after a really offensive question about imagine that you were a slave escaping, and the textbooks were pulled from this shelf in Monroe County, and we had to use a, oh gosh, what is it called? It's from the diversity, and I'll post it on here, but a rubric on which you can evaluate textbooks if you're on a textbook adoption committee. And we found a better one. It wasn't great. I'm not in love with it, but we did find a better textbook, and I can list that too. Keith?
I think one of the best ones I've seen is McGraw-Hill. This is the California version, but of course each state has a version. And it has different things, of course, but this one's the inquiry journal that students have. So it's an approach to history and social studies that's totally inquiry oriented. That's probably why Monroe County didn't adopt it, is because it's too far from what people were expecting. It's not just stories about the past that students are supposed to remember. It's a way of engaging them in investigations of the past. So it's McGraw-Hill.
Thanks, Keith. And we got another question of how would you suggest introducing how to find reliable sources for research? And I think that Liz's presentation will go over that, but Keith, do you have a brief answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, these days there's just so many places you can go, but obviously Liz is going to be talking about the Library of Congress, and there are a lot of other similar places like that, National Archives, and other organizations, whether universities, foundations, and so on, government agencies that have compiled original documents and photographs and so on, and those are a great starting point.
Awesome. And Teaching Tolerance, too, has great collections that we'll go over at the end as well. Okay. How do you suggest teaching our ELL learners when teaching U.S. history?
Well, that's... I mean, first of all, I want to say that's something I talk about a lot in my book, Doing History. It's also, I meant to say that one of the people who wrote this McGraw-Hill series is one of the teachers in Doing History, and all of her experience is working with English language learners. And probably, well, amongst the key points there, connected to background experiences as much as possible. So, of course, you're going to be doing things like looking at social history, families, children, and so on, and not looking at early political leaders of Indiana. So you're going to be building on things they already know, but also visual sources. And, of course, visuals are built throughout my presentation. I didn't even talk about them, but photographs and other kinds of visual sources are just absolutely key to learning history for all students. And for English language learners, obviously, that's a way that you can very immediately connect them to the past. They can look at a photograph of something and get a lot more out of it than looking at a historical document where the language is difficult for anyone.
Awesome. I just got done teaching a course on ELLs and with a social studies focus this summer. So it's top on my mind to get ELLs ready for the lesson that maybe first language speakers will have. So you want to present the vocabulary to them beforehand and teach the background knowledge to do a background knowledge lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, for them getting oral language in lessons, sentence frames and other participatory structures that will support them to success will support all of your students to success too.
And you know what, because of the limitations of the Zoom framework, I can't show you something on the board behind me, but when I teach this to my pre-service teachers, one of the things I emphasize is that when you have that visual image, you want to constantly be pointing to things in it as you talk about the vocabulary in it, so that they can make the connection between the vocabulary and what they see, because they may not, if you're not literally pointing to it, they may not know what words you're saying.
Images are just so awesome for igniting students' interest, for getting them into a lesson, for understanding a concept, for ordering things, for sorting things. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to learn. Somebody, Angie Kirkham, asked something that's, Angie went to the National Council for the Social Studies with me this year, and she won a First Timers Award. This year, our National Council for the Social Studies Conference will be online. Unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunately, so we don't have a big epicenter of outbreak, but nonetheless, she and I both have talked a lot about the marginalization of social studies in the curriculum and how testing is focused on reading and language arts and math mostly. And Philip Van Fossen at Purdue described the elementary curriculum, that English or language arts and math as the twin engines driving the elementary school curriculum. So with that preface, this tends to be an issue in the United States, spurred on by No Child Left Behind and the way on which tests count and which tests don't count. Even though social studies is tested, it's not one of the high stakes tests, etc. So we are redoing that with every Student Succeeds Act. But Angie's question was really about how you noticed that history and social studies was taught every day in other countries. And this seems to be an issue in the U.S. So do you have any suggestions, Keith? That's like a dissertation, Angie.
Well, it's so easy, and Charity just already answered this in the chat box. It's literacy. I mean, anything you do with history involves language. There's no requirement in the literacy portion of the day. There's no place that says, do not use nonfiction. And yet that's what we wind up doing. We only use fictional stories to teach it. But in fact, you can use books about history. You can use historical fiction. You can have students writing about the photographs and images and documents that they're using. So to me, I simply don't see a difference between teaching social studies and teaching literacy. There's no way you can teach social studies without literacy. And to teach literacy, students need a lot of information, and that comes from social studies and science. Really recommend the work of Nell Duke on this topic of how students need to read more informational text.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. We have time for like one more question with Keith if you have one. Keith, that was wonderful. We appreciate your time. Let's give Keith a round of applause here.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. All right. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Liz Osborne. Liz will come on here in a second, and she is the Director of Education for the Center for Representative Government on the IU Bloomington campus. She's the current president of the Indiana Council for the Social Studies. In these roles, she has led major social studies initiatives across the state, including the Digital Engaging Congress program. She has served as the assistant to the Chief Justice for Court History and Public Education, as well as having positions as a professor at IUPUI and IU Bloomington. But I think her coolest job was probably teaching social studies in Hawaii. So aloha, Liz. We're so glad that you're going to share with us today. Go ahead and take it over. She's going to lead you in workshops now. Just hang out with me and you'll be running early. I tend to run early. So we're already 15 minutes ahead of the game here.
Oh, I am never early. I'm horrible at giving you any extra minutes. I take all of them. I tell my students they start to pack up and I'm like, it's like 6 minutes before the end of class. Get that notebook back out. I have a lot to share with you. But I think since we're a little bit early, that everybody should turn on their cameras so that we can hold you accountable. And then you should get up and go to the bathroom, go get a Diet Coke or whatever is your thing, and we will be back like in 2 minutes. But everybody at least stand up because you're just sitting there.
Yeah. Two of them are pregnant, Liz. Two of them I know are very pregnant. So
the very pregnant
so
people,
show your belly,
you
Brittany
have to
and
stand up.
Ebony.
Who are our two pregnant people?
Brittany and Ebony. At least,
Okay.
who knows?
There could be others. We don't want any like first disclosures here.
Right. Well, we're open to that.
So get up, move around.
There's Ebony's baby.
That's right. See Ebony moving. The rest of you, come on. It's like, if
Sorry, I had to run to the bathroom.
No.
Yes, please run to the bathroom. The pregnant people need to go to the bathroom.
Yes,
I went to the bathroom during my bathroom is closed.
mid-session. I've been there. I remember.
That's right. So I'm like looking at people. I'm looking kind of at the questions here as people are going, because we kind of got some right after like Keith is signed. Oh, or Keith's answered one.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah. So I made you turn your cameras on while you got up and left, except for a few of you are not participating. Cassie, are you on twice, or do we have two Cassies? Oh, two Cassies. My niece is a Cassie. We also have two Angies, I see. Piercell, we don't know your first name. Can you unmute and
It's
tell.
Lucy. And we have a couple. We have Ellen, Ellie. We've got a couple of, Eleanor variations.
I love that. Nora, I love looking at people's names. So let's see. So yeah, I see that Charity teaches at a Catholic school. I actually taught at a Catholic school too, and we had in high school a 4-year social studies requirement, which is great job security for social studies teachers. Because I'm old, and as you probably could tell that whenever I put as my picture the space shuttle exploding, I don't know if you guys remember. I mean, most of you are too young to have, but we saw that live on television. So the year I graduated with my undergraduate degree, though, that was a terrible year. They're always saying there's going to be no jobs for social studies teachers, and they've kept saying that. Delaney, I love it. Your cat is in the background. I can see her tail. My cat is over there sleeping, watching I woke up this morning and the squirrel had knocked over my bird feeder. And so then like a whole colony of ducks was eating what was on the ground. And so my cat hasn't moved from staring at the ducks. And then
anytime I'm on video, my cat has to be present. So you'll see her a lot today.
usually she's all over my lap. I don't know if she's just kind of getting used to, me spending so much time on what. I have two of them. And I also have a plumber who's supposed to be like fixing the faucet that's leaking in my bathroom. So he might if I hear the doorbell ring and have to go get him. He came over and now he evaluated it right at 9:45 and now he has to send in the claim to the company. And then if they approve it, then he can come back and fix it. Just love these things. Okay, let's see. Lawanda, I can't tell if she's back yet. Oh, Michaela can't get her video to turn on.
I'm here. I just can't get my video to work. I don't know what's wrong with my computer today.
Yeah, well.
Michaela and her husband are both on this, so she's
I saw Mark.
There's her
that your
face. Hey, Michaela. Michaela's a really good singer. She should sing for us if any of the pregnant ladies get tired. She sang the national anthem for our IUPUC graduation last year.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool.
I agree. We should definitely get her to sing.
I'm okay.
Mark, have you done a PD with me before?
It's possible.
I know.
I've done so many.
I'm glad I'm so memorable.
I've done so many. It's hard to keep track.
That's a good thing to hear. Okay, so there we had about a 5-minute break. Does everybody at least feel like, a little bit energized? I did have some water this morning, but I'm pretty much a Diet Coke junkie. So, okay, let's get started. We are going to try to keep you active during these sessions because I know it's hard to sit. I'm actually doing a PD next week that's like 9 to 2. I'm not the only presenter. There's 4 of us, but like I wanted it to be 10 to 2, and one of the leaders is like, well, I just think that that's not enough time. We have to be longer. And it's like, are you kidding? Have you ever had to be the one sitting and intaking from like 9 to 2 on a thing? So we are going to try to get all of you to do an attendance because we, have 4 hours of PD for you. So when you're all here on your camera, my colleagues at the center are kind of taking attendance. So I am going to share screen now, so be gentle with me. We're trying something new on the share screen. I put my PowerPoints in the Google Slides, and we had to convert them to PDF. And so they don't fit exactly, but they're pretty close. And I am going to be toggling back and forth between being on camera and showing you my slides. And because I am a very interactive person, and usually we do this in person, and I'm walking around the room and I'm like showing you things, and I'm like making you talk whether you want to or not. My favorite thing is I make everybody stand up and they can't sit down until they, contribute to the conversation. So it's really hard to do on Zoom. I don't know if we can do that. I guess we could try it, but so just bear with me. And I am definitely high energy and talk faster than Keith. So we are going to do 3 sessions, and the first one is kind of a demonstration. I called it primary sources across the curriculum. So Keith and I, if we had sat down side by side and planned our presentations, we couldn't have done a better job of meshing our ideas of what is the most important thing for you to do with your students. And the most important thing, first of all, is just getting them to do that critical thinking, and which means you're integrating that key concept history into everything that you're teaching. So let's see. Oh, so now I have to master how it wants me to advance them too. You know what? This might not work, Kristen, because I lost my little button. Whenever we maximized a full screen, it lost the advance thing.
You can just share your PowerPoint from your screen. So just share your screen. You don't need to go from the Google.
I'm going to do that, guys. I'm stopping share, and then I'm going to reshare from the PowerPoint. We were trying to be more efficient, but, it isn't working. So we're going to go back to my previous way. So don't you just love it whenever everything, you think that you've got such a good system going. I've got to minimize this other thing. Now I can't get closed out of that full screen. I can't get us to go. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna share a new screen. Just go back to regular old traditional PowerPoint. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so I am from the Center on Representative Government. I resisted reminding Stephanie that we're not on Congress, on representative government, or we did change our name a while ago. I don't know how long you guys have been teaching, but we used to be called the Center on Congress. And so a lot of our stuff sometimes is still out there with that brand. But our main goal is to educate the public, and specifically students. We say the public, but 100% of my work is with teachers and students about the history and operation of our government in order to help develop informed and active citizens. So really that all comes down to what Keith was talking about, that teaching students these critical thinking skills and how to analyze evidence and draw conclusions helps them to be better citizens in everything that they do. So usually we ask you to put in your congressional districts, which is a real nice test of active citizenship, because can all of you put in the chat box what your congressional district is? And then the question is, did you know what your congressional district was before I put this map up here? So that's the one thing. It's like we all want to be informed citizens, but do we even know what our congressional district is? And to get even more, and I have to admit, I do not know, like, what is your state senatorial or congressional or House district? I mean, those are the people who are passing laws here in Indiana that affect our lives every day, but do we even know who they are? And I have to say, most of us don't. I do know, since I moved to Marion County, I do know who the city council people are because they show up on the news a lot, right? But otherwise, this is like one of our most important, the people who make the most important decisions about us, and most of the time we don't even know who they are. So, but now let's move on to the task for today. And Keith, near the end of his presentation, was talking about how important it is for students to actually use primary sources and to use more than one primary source. So when I'm doing kind of the big full day, oh, by the way, Jenny, I hope you're recording out there. Sorry. I don't know if we stopped recording at the end of Keith's, and we were going to try to record the individual sessions so that they would be smaller chunks for people to download and watch. But that primary sources, and I really work on this word primary sources. I think that most of us default to the word documents, right? But documents are so Flat Stanley. That's what I remember, Flat Stanley, like where you have to take Flat Stanley around and take his picture all over the place. Like usually about second grade is like when my grandkids have had to take Flat Stanley everywhere. And so I think the default for most people is to have flat items like documents. Now that's great, again, if they're things that interest your students. And the pictures that Keith showed were fantastic. The kids, the girls in their outfits playing basketball, that was incredible, right? In those long things. And I love to look at the pictures of women playing tennis 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It's like, how did they run around the court like that? Now, Serena Williams, she still probably would have kicked everyone's butt. But I mean, the rest of us, I would have been tripping over my skirts as I tried to run for the ball. So choosing primary sources that interest your students is really important. And at the very beginning, what you have to do, though, is make sure your kids understand what's the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. And that's one of those critical things. So I want to go to look in the chat, and I want everybody, and this is when I have trouble when I'm presenting, is I'm now opening the chat. I want everybody to put an example for me of a primary source. So I see a diary entry by Brittany. That's great. Come on, a few more. I know the rest of you know what some other primary sources are. Newspapers, journals, a ballot, the U.S. Constitution, a picture, newspapers. We got a lot of newspapers going on here. Oh, I see somebody put in biography. So is a biography a primary source? So this is where, oh, I love poems and songs and interviews. Those are great. Aha, here we had someone put in an autobiography. A bibliography, now is it see, what is so crazy about primary sources versus secondary source? A lot of times depends on the timing and how you're using it, right? Now take a biography. Let's look at our definition that's on the screen. And I love this because it's from the Library of Congress, and it gives us a nice kind of clean definition of primary source versus secondary source. Like the idea that something was created at the time under study. So if you're studying the early 1900s, tickets from things like the Titanic would be perfect, right? Genealogical records would be perfect. Letters would be perfect. But what about a biography that was written in 1900? So generally, biographies are secondhand accounts or interpretation of events by someone without firsthand experience. So what if someone in 1900 writes a biography of George Washington? Obviously, he didn't know George Washington. He didn't even live in George Washington's era. But it's still, nope, this is supposed to be the primary source slide is the one I hope you're seeing on the screen. That was somebody asking. But what he writes in 1900 about George Washington can tell us a lot about what people in 1900 wanted to believe. So that's really tricky for your students. It's like everything at some point in time can become a primary source. But in the time, like right now, for example, if my student wanted to go read a biography of, I'm a huge tennis player, so sorry, Serena Williams is always going to be popping into my mind, or Roger Federer or something. I love Roger Federer too. Rafael Nadal. I like them all. I'm really missing tennis a lot at this point. If one of your kids wants to go read a biography of Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, Rafael Nadal, that's great. They're reading a biography, but that is someone interpreting that material about them. If they read the Twitter feed or the Instagram of Serena Williams or Roger Federer, they're now reading a primary source. And that's one of those places that I want you to think about ways to be creative with your primary sources. Our kids live in digital ages, right? The stuff they're watching that people create themselves and put on YouTube are primary sources. Instagram, Twitter, those can all be primary sources, right? So you have to be kind of creative, and that idea for helping your kids understand the difference between primary or secondary, I think, especially at the early elementary, if you work on that idea of something that's created at the time under study. So we're studying Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving. What is a primary source about the first Thanksgiving? That's getting rough, right? You know, because we don't have any photographs of the first Thanksgiving. So first of all, that's like a great activity with your students, is just ask them to think about, how could we study the first Thanksgiving, right? What are the things that, you know, we could use? And that goes right to what Keith was talking about, you know, looking at, you know, the post holes or the pottery shards or things like that. But then you're going to have all these books that are probably in your school library or in your own classroom library that are all these stories about the first Thanksgiving. So you should just talk to them about how people write about the past, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's evidence. It really shows us how people want to depict the past. Stephanie, jump in at any time, because you know I can go down a mouse hole and get really digressing here.
I'm with you in the mouse hole.
Okay.
You've just been sharing one slide, though. That was the only question we had, right?
Yes, I just had to have this slide up, and now I'm trying to advance to my next slide, but my next slide is not advancing either. Why are we having, oh, this is my next slide. I don't know how I got it, but it's here. So this is actually goes again, just so great with what Keith was talking about. This is one of the many teacher guides that the Library of Congress has for you. So the Library of Congress has this whole set of analysis tools. And just exactly the words that Keith was talking about. What do your students see on this primary source? And again, I want you to think about see in terms of use things like buildings, use things like statues. These statues are a huge conversation piece right now. Whenever you get back to school and your students are asking, like, you know, why are they changing the name of my school? Or why are they taking down the statue in Garfield Park? I mean, they're looking at those things. And then what do you think? What are you thinking about this? What is your reaction? What do you think is happening? And then the questions. And Keith was having us put things, asking us to do that with those very first pictures. So the Library of Congress, and in the Google folder that we made for you, we have a bunch of these analysis sheets that you can download, because the Library of Congress has different ones for looking at photographs, listening to an interview, reading a poem, looking at a map, because how you lead your students into looking at those things is slightly different depending on what kind of item it is. Of course, they have ones for text as well, where you're going to focus on things like the vocabulary and stuff, but they have them. And then the other side of this is like spaces where the students would fill in. So especially at the beginning of the year, and I have seen this done even with really young elementary, like first graders or pre-writing kids, you can give them stickies And you can put like the, see, think, wonder, the things up, and they go and put a sticky into the column that they want to put an answer in. So even if they can't write it, you can still explore these things with them and be creative about other ways that, they can articulate it. So here is my first slide, which is kind of a transition. And now compared to the great pictures that, Keith had up, this is really boring, because I wanted you to do in the chat, I wanted you to put down a see, think question, see, think, wonder, observe, reflect question, whatever is the vocabulary you like to use in your classroom. I wanted you to go ahead and put in the chat something you see, something you're thinking about, or something you wonder about this picture. So go ahead and put things in the chat. So let's see, why are there so many tags? What kind of dog is it? I wonder what Owney did. That's such a nice question. And again, remember what Keith was talking about, using a picture that kids can, are interested in? I would gather that most of your kids will be interested in seeing a picture of a dog, right? George Washington, again, maybe not so interesting. Now, George Washington's dog, there's some really good books about Thomas Jefferson's dog. So if you want to kind of get a way into Thomas Jefferson, there's some good kids books about Thomas Jefferson's dog. Why are there so many tags? I bet this dog traveled a lot. Now see, is there a connection with the year 2011? Because we have 2011. Why is forever crossed out? I love that. These are great. Now I'm not counting to see if everybody put one in. This is the honor society. You've got to I'm counting on you to do one. So I wonder how we got his name. So these are the things, kids care about these things, right? And one of the things that my philosophy always is if I can get them to care a little bit about this thing that I'm showing and sharing with them, that if they're wondering about it, they're more likely to listen to the answer you give them, right? So you've tricked them into kind of participating. You've got their mental juices going. And if they're asking the questions, instead of you telling them, they're invested in your answer. And this is exactly what Keith was talking about, why it's so important for the kids to be asking the questions. I love this. Is this a real dog or a cartoon dog? Why does the dog look sad? Now there's, sorry, squirrel ran across. I'm looking at Owney and a squirrel just ran across my vision. Is Owney a service dog? That is so great. I love these questions you guys are asking. So one of the things that we want to do is we're having the kids draw evidence. So the person who said, "What is Owney a service dog?" What kind of evidence, what did you see in this picture that made you think maybe he would be? So if Nora and the other person who typed that in could just put in why they thought maybe Owney was a service dog. See, this is why it's so hard. I want to go and stand right next to you and talk to you, and then I can make sure you answer my question. So I can't make Nora answer my question. So Nora, I saw the word service on one of the tags, U.S. mail service. So see, there's her evidence. There's some of her observation. Exactly. And people said travel. The person who said it looked like he traveled a lot. Why did you say you think he traveled a lot? Why are you calling this dog Owney for other people? Type in, why did people say that, is Owney a service dog? This is killing me, this wait time, waiting for you guys to type. Oh, it's rough. See, Angie says Owney is on his collar. Now, see, this is a great example of how we can teach our students about using evidence to draw a conclusion. This is a collar, and based on our life experience and the things we know, usually this is a collar, and if you have a name on your collar of your pet, it's usually his name. And that's such a simple example, but that's a skill that they're then going to transfer to other things. It's just like, oh, advance yet. Oh, dang, sorry. How do I get back now? Oh, here we go. And again, the person who said he traveled a lot, he has tags. And look, this tag says hotel, It says his dog ship. So he's got all these tags and things. So just having your kids ask about this thing. So somebody asked about why is forever crossed out. One of the things I am super proud of you guys for not putting in, and usually I do everyone as a bazinga, is nobody said this is a stamp. And that's one of the things I usually get. And let me tell you, I don't think there's any old grumpy men on this call because you guys all look young at heart and fun. But I can almost bet you that it'll be old grumpy men social studies teachers who will say, it's a stamp. We all know it's a stamp. You know what? We know it's a stamp because in our society, we use stamps. Ask your kids if they've ever used a stamp. My daughter, who is 22, about 5 years ago, I sent her to the post office to buy a stamp in the machine out and thing. Like, she called me to get directions, right? She's never bought a stamp. She emails everybody, you know, she texts everyone. I was in Egypt on a trip and I always send postcards home and I send them especially to my grandkids. It's how I teach geography. And my host had her driver go to the post office to get stamps for me. He had no idea what she was talking about. He knew what the post office was, but she had to describe to him and, you know, use all these words because she couldn't use the word stamp. And she's drawing a letter and she's pointing to it because most people in Egypt, and I'd say in most places in the Middle East, because when I was in Jordan this spring, I had a horrible time finding mailboxes. They don't mail things. They do everything as cash transaction. Literally, the waterman knocks on your front door. He has one of those little notebooks like they used to have at the dry cleaners and tells you what your water bill is, and you go get cash and you pay him. They have cell phones, right? They go to the kiosk and pay for their cell phone. Like, they don't have this, you know, sending everybody letters and stamps the way I do. So if you could have kids or in other places that don't know what a stamp is. So we can't just say it's a stamp. You have to gather the evidence, and some of the evidence for it being a stamp are these zigzaggy edges, right? The 2001 is the date, and forever. Forever is crossed out so people don't try to print it on a color printer and put it on their postcards. So, okay, so sorry, I digress yet again. So let's go to the next step now, and I'm gonna try to like turn my computer over, and can you see I kind of have a selection of books over here on behind me. So I'm going to back up. This is the best I can do on Zoom. And I'm going to pick my book here about Owney. So the question of is Owney a real dog? He sure as heck is. So we are nonfiction here, just like Keith was talking about. And actually I have another book about Owney, and there's a lot of different books about Owney. So who the heck is Owney? I even have a stuffed animal, like, because I went to I won't tell you which museum yet, and got my Owney book. So Owney is the male pouch Pooch. And this picture here is the real Owney. So when Owney died, they had him, what's the word? When you taxidermied. So this is the real Owney. They taxidermied him, and he is on display. So I'm going to try to read a little bit of the book to you. And I know this is very awkward. Stephanie, is this okay to try this on Zoom? Okay, so this is Owney, the male pouch.
The book is perfect.
The male pouch Pooch. So see, look, on Zoom, if you guys have to Zoom in the fall, give it a try. So this is Owney, and he's wandering around the streets of Albany, New York, and it's very cold and rainy. And he's looking for some place to sleep, and he can get into the post office. And the next morning when the mailmen show up, he is sleeping on the mailbag. So they kind of adopt Owney. He hangs out at the post office. He goes with them riding here to go collect the postmen. And then one day, Owney jumps on the train and rides off, the mail train. And all of the men at the post office, and they were men, you could talk about that too, were very sad because they thought that they would never see Owney again. Stephanie, you look like you want to say something. You're muted though. Okay, so Eventually, a few months later, Owney shows back up. And they are like, Owney, where have you been? We were worried about you. And so they decide that they're going to put a collar on Owney. And they put a note on the collar that said, this is Owney. He is the mascot of the Albany Post Office. If you have Owney visit you, please put a note on to tell us where he's been. And whenever he comes back the next time, he has got a whole collection of medals on his collar. And you can see that on the taxidermied Owney, that those really are the medals that Owney got on his travels. And Owney traveled all across the country. He went to post office, in and out. He rode some steamboats. Eventually, though, Owney got old. And Owney couldn't jump on and off the rail trains anymore. So what they decided to do is they gave Owney a retirement trip. And his trip was to go around the world on different mail vehicles. So he starts off in San Francisco, I believe, and he goes across the ocean, and he goes to Japan, he goes to the Middle East, he goes to the Canary Islands.
Will you hold the book closer to the screen?
Oh. And eventually, well, let me go back to this one. So there he goes to, you can see the camels and you can see the men. Now, of course, we've got these very stylized hats indicating the men from China there. And then eventually he finds his way back to the United States, coming in at the Statue of Liberty. And he has kind of a reception at the end. So Owney was a real dog. He really did do this, and that's why he is on the stamp, and he is in the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. And what I like to do with Owney is exactly that idea we were talking about of incorporating literacy, social studies literacy, into your social studies into your literacy units. Oh, I have to come over here to advance my slide, sorry. So I'm sorry. So one of the things I do incorporate in using the Owney book is an idea about talking about map skills. And again, to make it local and close to them, I did Indiana. So if you look at a map of Indiana, the one that's on this side, it's my left. I assume it's your left too. These were Indiana railroad lines about 1850. And this is fun because you guys could put a tack in where you are. You could put a tack in like where Indianapolis is. You could put a tack in where their grandparents live. This map on the right-hand side are the railroad lines at the time the Owney book was written. So you can see, which is around, not the book was written, but Owney lived. So you can see in about 50 years how railroad networks became one of the main means of transportation. You can also, let me see what my next slide is. Another thing that you can do with it is you can incorporate into a unit on transportation. What were all the different methods of transportation that Owney was on this trip? Because we saw pictures of him riding in the wagon, we saw him in a truck, we saw him on a camel, we saw him in a rickshaw, we saw him in a steamship. So if you're talking about different modes of transportation, you can kind of connect it to the book on Owney. And here is an activity that I do. I tried, you can kind of see behind me here on my porch, I put a map up. What I do when I'm doing this in a workshop is I put a map up and we put little tags. Hang on just a second, I'm backing up again to get my magic box. Okay, so here's my magic box. And I have little tags. These tags, this particular one, because they're different all the time depending on what's in the Target dollar spot or I can find at the Dollar Tree. So I have these little tags. These happen to be Christmas tags, like to and from tags. And so your students can write on them the name of one of the states that Owney visited, and then they can go up to the map and tack it on the map. And then you can do it with the countries too. And again, this was from the Target dollar store. Yeah. just have that. Let's see, I don't know if I have any. Oh, I have some garage sale little ones too. Or dots, like here are dots from the dollar store that they can put the dots on the map. So you can use this as a part of a geography lesson as well. You can do the geography both in the United States and out of the United States. Okay, so here's my world map to see all the different places that Owney traveled. I'm really big on incorporating geography because I grew up as a military kid and traveled and lived all over the world. And it amazes me how little geography our kids know or retain. Every time I teach about the 13 colonies and I make them learn where the 13 colonies are on a map, they look at me like I'm crazy. It's like when I mention Boston, I really want you to have an idea of how far Boston is from Indiana, how far Boston is from England, you know. Okay, so here's my transportation, some examples. So here I went and just took pictures that I found at the Library of Congress of the different kinds of transportation. And this is very similar to what Keith was doing when he showed you the progression of the different cars. Okay, and then again, make it relevant to their lives today. How do you get your mail delivered? Even if a lot of them haven't like sent a letter or gotten a letter, they've all seen mail trucks. You could even, like, to make this more updated, I should have an Amazon Prime van, because probably they've all seen an Amazon Prime van in the last few months, or a FedEx truck or a UPS truck. But again, to make it relevant to their lives and to talk about, like, what is the role? Like, the postmaster was the first official cabinet position in the United States. The very first thing they established was a postmaster, because communicating with people is very important. And actually you could add, I should add another slide about communications. Like, how do you communicate with your friends? How do you communicate with your grandparents? What are the different ways that you communicate? And that kind of takes me to some more pictures that I have. And again, so I have my little props here. So I have the same pictures that are going to be on the screen. I actually have them all as laminated pictures so that the kids can hold them and manipulate and look at them. And just like Stephanie was saying about the ELL kids, I love to take my pictures and make sorted activities with them, but I also like to put them up on the walls of the classroom as like a gallery walk, because then as I'm going through the unit, I keep pointing to them, say, remember this, remember when we talked about this, and it makes it that really visual reinforcement for them. So I printed these out just on my copier at work, and then I had laminated them. And I know most schools, I think, have laminating machines, so you can laminate them and put them through. You don't have a laminating machine, I also use page protectors. If I use page protectors, I buy a ream of cardstock myself and just print them on cardstock before I put them in the page protector. The other thing is, if you laminate them, you can give kids their expo markers and they can write on them. So you can actually, when you're doing that see, think, wonder, you can actually say, what do you see? And have them like circle the things that they're seeing. So again, you make that very concrete evidence. If you can't circle it, if you're not seeing it, then it means you're thinking about it or you're wondering about it. You're drawing a conclusion. So I've got just a few pictures here. We can zip through these quickly. And all these pictures are in the folder. So how do you get your mail delivered? So this is a picture from Puerto Rico. Somebody's getting their mail delivered on a horse. So here's air mail. Sometimes air mail gets delivered by plane. So here is out in the country, somebody like the rural delivery. And I'm sure some of you probably have kids who live in rural areas, and you can look at the not paved road in the car. So here you can do a cross-cultural comparison. Look at this. This is a picture from a mail carrier in Berlin. So in Germany, in Europe. You know, one of the things that I do, and maybe I should incorporate this into my slideshow, is I take pictures of mailboxes. Because I mail postcards to my grandkids from all over the world, I take pictures of the mailboxes, because mailboxes don't look the same everywhere. I can only see Ebony and Stephanie's faces, so I don't know if all the rest of you think that I'm crazy or not. And I probably am crazy, but that's okay. I embrace it. Okay, and finally, have your kids write and send postcards. They could start with one about Owney, but you could even make this a habit that you do with multiple units. And I mean, I know we all have really constrained budgets at our schools, and I know a lot of us as teachers spend our own money doing stuff, and now sometimes you might not even be seeing them, so they could do a virtual postcard, but you can actually have your kids do that physical writing, right? You can use, we called it at my kids' school, backpack mail. Like you could, if you don't have money for postage to send a real letter to their house, you could put it in backpack mail, right? Or you could set up a mailbox in your room and they could write postcards to each other, or they could exchange postcards with teachers at every grade, at other grade levels, or even within their same grade. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can kind of integrate that into your unit. Sorry. So finally, or maybe not finally, because it's never finally for me, I know that I think that Keith had some examples of newspapers. So what I did here is I actually used newspapers. So again, primary sources, this is nonfiction. I went to the Chronicling America, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And I just put, you can see really tiny right here, I put Owney in here. And then I put the date ranges that I knew from the book about Owney's life. And I found all of these newspaper articles that you see up here, and I don't think we can see how many. Oops, sorry. Oh, not done yet. I'm trying to move the band around. I don't know if we can see how many results I got here. So what did I get? 31,000 results whenever I put Owney in there and put those dates. And the cool thing about this is underneath it tells where all the newspapers are that come. So the newspapers would actually, this is like the 1920s, right? The newspapers talked about this dog coming into their neighborhoods. Can you believe it? And I have in the folder, I have from the Roanoke, Virginia newspaper, I actually have one of the newspaper articles in there. So you could do a fun thing, and you can see a nice thing is that your kid's search term comes up in red. So you don't even have to ask them to really read the newspaper. You can just see all the times it was talked about, and maybe you can find, depending on your grade level, an article that's kind of an appropriate difficulty. So the idea that this dog, and most kids love dogs, if they don't have one, they might want one, or they know someone who has one, actually had this real experience. So finally, to continue and extend the unit, you could visit a post office. I know field trips are, horribly hard. You could invite a post office worker to come visit your school. You could even have a post person come to your school every single day bringing the mail. So maybe you could just interact with that postman. So there's lots of ways. So then this can also become part of like a community helper type thing. And maybe they could do something nice for the postman. They could write him a letter saying, thank you for bringing our mail. So I'm going to take a little break here. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a minute so I can go back and see you. And I want to see all of your lovely faces. And I'd like you to have some ideas, like what is a topic that you think you would like to come up with to do something like this? Do any of you have a book that you've read that you can now, or used in your class, that you can now imagine doing kind of an extended lesson on and incorporate things? So I'm going to look at the chat. I'm going to maximize my chat so I can see it here. Oh, wow, that was one famous dog. That is the truth. It's amazing when I found all these articles. And like I said, there's also in the folder for you under the session 1 folder, you have this PowerPoint. You have 2 sample newspaper articles. You also have a resource sheet that I gave you that has a list of about 10 or 15 Owney articles from the newspapers. I went to Ellis Island last year, and it was such a cool experience. I'd never been to New York City, and I went to Ellis Island, and to actually see the process of how they go through, I think like Ellis Island, anything about Ellis Island is a great message. So people with disabilities through history, that is a really good one. sadly, in a lot of countries, like, how disabled children were treated was really very sad. But I love the idea of how you can take a book and you can tie it and make this theme through like geography and math and English and really kind of, tie it into so many things. I find, and I'm sure you know the same thing, is that any book that has stuff about kids in it interests them, right? So, oh, you got to see your grandparents' manifest. I got to see my uncle's immigration papers. They came through Detroit, through Canada. They didn't go to Ellis Island, and I got to see that. I thought that was very exciting as well. Love that chapter book. Amelia Earhart. And Amelia Earhart has connections to Purdue. Now, see, I can say that because you guys have that Purdue connection. And sadly, my daughter went there and graduated. I don't know where we went wrong. We have 4 degrees from IU and she went to Purdue. But they have the Amelia Earhart archives up at Purdue, and they have some great pictures of Amelia Earhart. So again, you could make it really local for your kids. Like this famous lady that we all know about. I'm sure she probably has a stamp. But you could look at online at Purdue at the Amelia Earhart papers. They're very cool. We have a great we were doing a project that I'll talk about later, and it has we use some pictures from there. So Stella by Starlight. This kid's next year, younger's dad, time to vote. Oh gosh, yeah, there's so many good books. So just think of like these books, and you can save the chat down here at the very bottom on the screen, or no, it's actually in the chat in the 3 dots that are over on the right-hand side of the chat box. You can actually save the chat, so then you could get people's ideas for books and things like that. So I want you all to think of a new unit that you might do or expand it and bring primary sources in related to these books that you're doing. So you need to think of how you're going to find primary, like pictures or my stuff. I guess my stuff Owney does not count as a primary source, but newspaper articles and pictures, and bring in some stuff like that. Okay, well, I'm going to put you to work here in a minute. So I'm going to share my screen for a minute more, and then I'm going to put you to work in breakout rooms. Okay, so I wanted to have us do a very similar activity with this, and I don't know how I found, I know why I found this book, because, so I wanted to do a book about a topic related to the idea of lighthouses. So in the chat box, first of all, I want you to tell me in the chat box, what is a lighthouse's job? Because our book is going to be by Sophie Blackall called Hello Lighthouse. And I want you to tell me in there, what is the job of a lighthouse? Alert ship to the coastline, to guide sailors to shore, to let boats know where the shore is, to protect ships, to guide. Lots of good answers there. I'm going to need a sip of Diet Coke here while you continue. A lookout, guide to safety, to warn boats. All perfect answers. I love those. You know what? Do your kids know what lighthouses are? I mean, I don't know. We don't have many lighthouses in Indiana. To serve as a navigational guide. I really like the one to keep the boat safe, right? Is a really good one. So what do you think are some of the different kinds, thinking of my Owney example, what are some of the different ways you could incorporate lighthouses into kind of this using primary sources across the curriculum, like the way that I did geography and transportation? What are some of the ways that you can incorporate a book about lighthouses? STEM, creating a lighthouse. Michaela, I have a treat for you in a few minutes. Oh, there is a lighthouse in Michigan City, at least at the outlet center. So there probably is one there on the lake. Good point, good point. I'm going to have to find You guys are going to find that in a minute. Mapping some lighthouses. Oh, there's a good geography lesson. And hopefully then they'll probably notice like where those are, and not just in the United States, right? Oh, good. Thank you. Take a virtual trip inside a lighthouse. Fantastic. So we've got a geography element so far because we've mapped them. What are some other? Okay, so here in science, lakes versus oceans, right? So then we've got, you know, where do you need to have them? The architecture, the differences of lighthouses, stories of storms lighthouses have endured. You know what else I really like is like economics, like where are lighthouses located? You've mapped them now, and you talk about, you know, around areas that have lighthouses. There could be shipping, there could be fishing, there could be cruise boats. So your kids, probably maybe some of your kids have been on cruises, right? There are some great stories about lighthouse keepers and living in lighthouses, right? A good map, or you can really tie it into math as well, because you can kind of do the math and engineering the stem of a lighthouse, like how many flights of stairs does it have, what different shapes are in a lighthouse, how is the light fueled and kept burning over time. I mean, all sorts of amazing things. And I love the idea of the word sheltering. Can we remember that? And Stephanie, I'm going to put you in charge of helping remember that. The idea of lighthouses are sheltering, that they help make a safe place. So what we're going to do now is I want all of you to go to loc.gov, and in the search box up in the top right corner, I want you to put lighthouses. And then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms so that you can, and this will be my first time using breakout rooms, so I am a little scared, I have to say. I'm just going to stop screen sharing now. I'm going to hit the button that's going to put you all in breakout rooms so you can talk to each other in the breakout room. So I guess I should show you, let's see. I'm going to show you where oh, that isn't what I want. Stop share. In the Library of Congress, loc.gov, if you go to the upper right-hand corner, you will see a box that you can put. I've got too many things open up here, so it's not letting me do it very easily because this isn't the one that I wanted. loc.gov, and in the box, put in lighthouses. So I'm going to go to breakout rooms now. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes in the breakout rooms to talk, and then we're going to come back as a group, and in your chat boxes, I want you a description of some of the things that you found. Okay, Stephanie has already put one in. You can even cut and paste the web address. So go. I'm hitting breakout rooms now. Bye. Hi, baby Smallwood. Okay, so we're automatically putting you in. There's going to be 5 rooms. Create rooms. Open all rooms. Okay, you guys should be in there. So Brittany, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know why you didn't get assigned to a breakout room. So you can be a personal breakout room.
Okay.
Are you able to go into loc.gov and to look for a lighthouse resource?
Yes, I'm on there.
Have you found anything good so far?
So I was looking at some of the different prints of lighthouses. And right now I'm in the one in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at some of the photographs, thinking about how I could use those, as you and Keith were saying, to use as artifacts.
So we're actually going to look at a lesson that the Library of Congress has, a design a lighthouse lesson. So I'm going to share that.
Okay.
I wonder, so I'm going to see if I can visit another breakout room now. This
Okay.
is for me. I've never done the breakout rooms before.
I've never done a breakout room either, so
I don't know, like, let me see if I can, I can assign you to, I'm going to put you in breakout room 3.
okay.
Bye.
Yeah, it's asking me to join.
Yes, go join. Oh, and our kind of ending thought, I think this is the last slide for today, for this session, that I want you to think about is, I want you to think about how a place can be a safe harbor. Because that showed up a lot of you in the words that you thought about kind of issues relating to safety, that a lighthouse provided safety for the ships and for the sailors and as an anchor of their community. So in session 3, when we're talking about taking informed action, which is the final element of that C3 framework, I'm going to kind of return to this idea of the safe harbor, and kind of, we talked about the lighthouse as providing safety for those sailors. We're going to talk about that. So I'm just going to kind of have you have that in the back of your mind. And we are going to have another little break here for a few minutes so you can go use the bathroom and grab another drink, have a cookie, and then you can talk to each other in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and just talk, even though it'll be kind of chaos on here. So it's 11:52, so we've got about 8 minutes to go grab your lunch. Come back. I guess I could have left you in the breakout rooms, but I didn't prep you in advance for that. So go use the bathroom, grab your lunch. We'll all leave our cameras on, so that way we'll be accountable that we showed back up, and we'll start back up again about noon. And maybe we'll see fun stuff that people are eating. I think I have pizza leftovers that I might pop in the microwave real quick. So I'll see you back at high noon.